The entire table burst out laughing when he said it. My sister's new boyfriend leaned back in his chair, swirling wine in his glass like he owned the room. Wait, so you're 30 and still doing that for work? More laughter. My parents smiled awkwardly. My sister smirked, and for a moment, I just sat there, staring at my plate, because they all thought I was the embarrassing one. But what none of them realized was that the house we were sitting in, the one they'd been bragging about all night, technically belonged to me, and they were about to find that out in the worst possible way. Dinner at my parents' house had always been complicated, not explosive, not dramatic, just uncomfortable in that quiet, subtle way where you could feel exactly where you ranked in the family hierarchy, and for as long as I could remember, I was somewhere near the bottom. My younger sister, Melissa, had always been the golden child. She was charming, beautiful, confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately owned it. My parents adored that about her. They loved introducing her to people, talking about her promotions, her vacations, her social life. Me, I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who kept things simple, which was their polite way of saying I wasn't impressive enough to brag about. But that night was different, because Melissa had someone new to show off, her boyfriend, Evan, and from the moment he walked through the door, I knew exactly what kind of person he was. You know the type. Expensive watch, perfect hair, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. He shook my hand when we met. Firm grip, then glanced down at my clothes. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a sweater, and I saw it immediately, that tiny flash of judgment. But that wasn't the worst part, not even clothes, because during dinner, the conversation turned to careers, and that's when everything started. So, Evan said casually, cutting into his steak, "What does everyone here do?" My dad answered first. He always liked to go first. "Well, I'm still running the consulting firm," Mom smiled, "and I'm doing part-time work with the community board." Then Melissa leaned in proudly. "I just got promoted to senior marketing manager." Evan clapped softly. Impressive. Then his eyes shifted toward me. "And you?" I wiped my mouth with a napkin. "I work in property management." Simple answer. Truthful, but apparently not interesting enough. "Property management?" he repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" I shrugged. "I manage residential properties, rentals, maintenance, tenants." Another pause. Then he chuckled. "Oh, that kind of the one that sounds polite, but isn't. But that's like apartment stuff, right?" "Mostly." He leaned back. "So basically you deal with broken toilets and late rent checks." The table laughed. Melissa laughed the loudest, and I felt that familiar, quiet pressure in my chest. But that wasn't the worst part. Not yet. Because Evan wasn't finished. He looked around the table again. "So wait, this house," he gestured to the dining room, "this is beautiful." Mom smiled proudly. "Yes, we love it here." He nodded approvingly. "Melissa told me you guys just moved in last year." Dad puffed up a little. "Yes, it's been a big upgrade for us." Then Evan smirked and looked back at me. "Well, at least someone in the family gets to live somewhere nice without fixing sinks for a living." The table exploded again. My sister wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, Evan." And in that moment, something inside me went very still. Because this wasn't new. Not really. The teasing, the subtle disrespect, the way my family laughed along because it made them feel a little superior. But that night, something changed. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the years of swallowing it. Or maybe it was the simple fact that they had absolutely no idea who they were laughing at, because 2 years earlier, after a decade of quietly saving, investing, and building a small property portfolio, I had bought this house. Not for myself. For them. They didn't know that part. Officially, the house belonged to an LLC. one that handled several rental properties across the city. They assumed it belonged to some anonymous investor. They rented it for far below market value. And I kept it that way, because they were family. But sitting there, listening to them laugh, something inside me shifted, because suddenly I realized something. They weren't just laughing at my job, they were laughing at the very thing that had given them this life. And that's when everything changed. I finished my dinner quietly, didn't argue, didn't defend myself, just smiled politely, which confused them, because usually when people mock you, they expect a reaction. But I had already decided what I was going to do, and it didn't require yelling or proving anything, just paperwork. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to my property manager. Yes, I need you to send a lease update notice. For which property? I gave the address. There was a pause. Are you sure? Yep, because the lease agreement had a clause. One they had never paid attention to annual price adjustment, market rate recalculation, and the market rate for that house had gone up dramatically. 3 days later, my mom called. Her voice was tight. Did you hear about this? Hear about what? Our landlord is raising the rent. I kept my tone neutral. Oh, it's ridiculous. She sounded genuinely shocked. Do you know how much? I already did, but I asked anyway. How much? She exhaled sharply, almost double. Silence hung between us. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. Well, I guess we'll just have to move. Move. From the house they loved. From the neighborhood they bragged about, because suddenly, the invisible landlord had stopped being generous. But the real moment came a week later. Another family dinner. This time, much quieter. Everyone looked stressed. Melissa complained about how unfair the situation was. This landlord is greedy. Dad nodded. People like that just want to squeeze every dollar. Then Evan spoke. Again. Of course he did. These property investor types are the worst. He shook his head. They don't even do real work. The irony was almost painful. I took a slow sip of water, and then I finally spoke. Actually, I said calmly, running property investments is a lot more complicated than people think. Evan smirked. Oh yeah. I set my glass down. For example, this house, everyone looked up. What about it? Melissa asked. Well, I continued. The owner probably kept the rent low for years. Mom nodded. Exactly, but eventually realized they were being taken for granted. The room went quiet. Evan leaned forward. And you know this how? I pulled a small folder from my bag, then slid it across the table. Inside was the LLC ownership document. With my name on it, the silence that followed was absolute. Melissa's face drained of color. Dad stared at the papers. Mom blinked rapidly. And Evan? He looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. You own the house? Melissa whispered. Yes. No anger, and no smugness. Just the truth. Dad cleared his throat. Why didn't you tell us? I met his eyes. Would it have changed how you treated me? No one answered, because we all knew the answer. Melissa looked down at the table. Evan suddenly found his wine glass very interesting, and for the first time in my life, the room didn't feel like it belonged to them anymore. It felt balanced, quiet, real. I stood up and grabbed my coat. The rent increase stays, I said calmly, but you'll still be paying less than market rate. Mom finally spoke. Why? I paused at the door, because the answer surprised even me. Because families should help each other. Then I opened the door, but before I left, I looked back at Evan, the guy who had laughed the loudest. You were right about one thing. He blinked. What? I smiled slightly. Property management does deal with broken things. Then I stepped outside, and sometimes, those things are people. I haven't been invited to dinner since, but strangely, that's the first time in my life I've felt respected. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's paperwork. And sometimes, the people laughing the hardest are the ones who never realize they're sitting in someone else's house until it's too late. Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones who never see the ending coming.